Welcome to the inverted upside down. You're listening to Paranormal Now with Alan B. Smith, rebroadcast on the UNX network Thursdays at 11 p.m. Pacific, Fridays at 2 a.m. Eastern.
However you are and whenever you are, welcome, good souls, to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith. Join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. And tonight we are turning off into the spiritual realm, the psychic realm of our own minds, and how we deal with this crazy life that we traverse day in and day out, and are just trying to figure this whole thing out. And that's everything. That's what the paranormal is all about. We're just trying to figure things out. And just within our inner world, every day we're trying to figure things out. It's a process that just never stops. So I'm really excited to have a guest on tonight, Jessie Kanzer. She is the author of Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing. So we'll be talking about that, healing, chilling, and living with the Tao Te Ching. If any of you are familiar with that spiritual philosophy, great. If not, this is going to be a fun ride for you as well. As always, I am enjoying my brew of alien coffee bean right here. A very concentrated espresso quality. And if you want to get your own alien coffee bean roast, go to aliencoffeebean.com and enter the Paranormal Now discount code. And that code is mystery20, all caps, mystery20. All right, let's get right to it, because now that Paranormal Now is a 1 hour show, I want to get in as much time as we can with our guests. So let's welcome Jessie Kanzer. Jessie, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And it's a real treat to talk with you. I think that bridging the spiritual, the paranormal, and everyday life, that's kind of where I like to live. So I'm excited.
Yes, I'm glad that you feel that way too, because there is an intersection. All these things, one feeds into the other. So we'll talk about your work and your journey, but I have to ask you: do you have any paranormal beliefs? Do you believe in extraterrestrials or otherwise?
I believe in at least everything a little bit, but I actually do
Hmm.
believe in extraterrestrials. And I think that I think you have to be crazy not to at this point after seeing the vastness of the universe, the galaxy, and with the technology we have now. We've all seen the pictures of the latest pictures, right, from the telescope. So it's like,
Yeah.
come on, what are I mean, it's kind of very, to me, it's the height of hubris to think that we would be the only ones.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And also, there is something called form follows function in evolution, which is, beings develop eyes. In disparate species separately developed eye systems on the planet Earth, and it's just because it's logical. And so nature finds ways of navigating the world that we live in, and so much is so similar, it seems so far, on rocky planets elsewhere, that if there are similar conditions to Earth, then it's quite likely that, or quite possible, that there would be beings that have legs and arms and two eyes, but most excitingly, that would require intelligence. And that to me is what's really exciting, because um, that's what makes everything special, consciousness itself. So let's go back to your story. um, what what is your journey, and how did you arrive at this philosophy of life that was inspired by the Tao Te Ching?
So I think that probably a lot of us seekers and folks who maybe don't fit into the boxes of society necessarily, I think we
Hmm.
probably, if you asked everyone, we probably felt something very early on in life, a sort of differentiation, I would say. And for me, that was very true, but it became more heightened because I ended up as a refugee. So I was born in the former Soviet Union, and my family tried hard to leave for a long time for many reasons that I think are pretty clear these days because,
Hmm.
we see what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. And so I'm half Ukrainian, half Latvian, and we were trying to get out for a while. As a child, I didn't really understand any of it, but I did eventually find myself as a refugee in Europe and then eventually in America.
Hmm.
And this was on the heels of the Cold War. And so was not exactly welcomed just because, the only language I ever spoke up to that point was Russian. And so I had a hard time to cut to the chase. I had a hard time early
Sure.
on. I had
And
to
you were about 8 years old when you
Yes,
came over?
exactly,
Okay. Hmm.
exactly. Which happens to be, by the way, the age my oldest daughter is now, and so it's been very healing for me, I think, to relive that age, not through myself.
Hmm.
And so, but anyway, so I struggled for various reasons, identity being the major struggle, and
Sure.
you know.
Yeah.
My book, Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing. I made sure, as a writer in general, I wrote a lot before this book. I wrote articles like New York Times, Washington Post, etc. But I started using somewhere along my writing, I started using Jessie Asya Kanzer. So Asya was my birth name that I changed
Hmm.
here. And I what Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing is about is my journey from sort of losing myself to finding myself. And I really see it as a gift to have lost my identity early on because it opened me up to all these other things. Those feelings that I had even before I left the Soviet Union, those feelings of there's something else out there. And
Hmm.
this major search, which included for me later depression and as a teenager an eating disorder that went into my 20s and all sorts of like date rape, also all sorts of human struggles.
But
But
yeah,
it
wait, Jesse, that's a lot that you just
oh
went
yeah,
through. That's a
Yes, thank you for
lot.
slowing me down on those. I like to skip over those because, you know,
No,
it's
yeah, I mean, we don't want to linger in all that if you don't want to, of course. But
no, I can. Honestly, I've processed everything many times over to the point where I can talk about it
mhm.
without re-injuring myself.
Well,
Um,
let's just go back really quick
yeah,
because I'm curious, like, any one of those experiences that you just listed. How did you perceive your emotions after that, like your depression or
yeah.
PTSD or whatever? How did you perceive it at the time?
At the time, I turned on myself, and I think that's what me being sick was. Being sick, whether it was depression, anxiety, an
Yeah.
eating disorder, it was all about what's wrong with me.
Hmm.
And it was a very heightened feeling of being an outsider and just not knowing how to operate the way everyone else seemed to operate, or a lot of, let's just say enough people seem to operate pretty seamlessly in life. And
Hmm.
it took me a really long time to understand that there wasn't anything actually wrong with me.
So like your operation in society, interacting with people, that operation, or
I was pretty good. So I was an actress also, I should say, and I'm actually a good actress. Like in
hmm
life, I think that my survival mechanism
hmm
made me able to mold to my surroundings. I
yeah,
really
yeah,
Americanized very quickly. Um, I skipped over the parts of like not fitting in and I kind of, ducked my head down. And when I was bullied and all of that, I figured out I'm good at observing other people and what's going on around me. So I was able to mold and fit in
sure,
and get my
yeah,
friends and all of that. But internally, I never felt like I belonged and I never felt like I was doing it right. And
hmm
there was a big chasm between who I was playing in life and who I was internally.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's the older I get, and now I'm just like this kind of, midlife mom in a suburb, but
hmm
I think that is true for most people.
Oh,
Not
oh,
everyone really,
I totally agree with you. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I've been through the same. I'm literally just going through that now. I'm just going through like another little phase. Just like yesterday and today, I was thinking, "Oh, I'm noticing some changes, and I'm like, I'm gonna try to let these things go, these other
yeah,
things go, and go with this flow and see how that works out. And I think that's natural, but I think we often get attached, right, to like who we think we are.
For me, and like you said, it's an ongoing thing.
Hmm.
Like I know a lot. Like I understand that these feelings or these self-doubts and all of these things are not true. But just because I
Hmm.
know that doesn't mean I don't still struggle. I don't still feel this disparity between the life I live, how I present myself, and what's going on internally. And I think that for me, becoming eventually an open book was the healthiest way of being in the world. Like
Sure.
where I will talk about any problem I've ever had, and I'll talk about all of my self-doubt, and you know, I'll talk about my messes, and I mess up all the time to this day.
Hmm.
Somehow, I find it's impossible to be human and not mess up because it's
Right.
woven into our experience here.
Sure. Yeah. 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 Even people who don't consider themselves perfectionists still
Yeah,
beat themselves up all the
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so for me, so coming from this very rigid society of the Soviet Union, and you know, listen, like Putin, who everyone knows who that is. I mean, that's an
Hmm.
exaggerated version, but any big archetype is just kind of a condensed version of what that society is, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And I think these archetypes come up to remind us of things within ourselves. I really have this belief that these like quote unquote evil people and people that we see on the big stage, you know, we have parts of that within ourselves.
Yeah.
And so for me, I came from this very rigid world, this society. And then America obviously has its own problems. We all have, you know, there's no perfection. And there's a lot of pressure in America also to, you know, keep up with the Joneses and to show a certain level of success, and especially to an immigrant. And so when I discovered Eastern teachings, uh, pointedly, like in this book, I talk the most about the Tao Te Ching. But to be
Hmm.
honest with you, I found ancient teachings to always say the same thing in different ways.
Interesting.
And so when I discovered, for me, it was the Tao Te Ching. When I picked it
Hmm.
up, it was like a really like a breath of fresh air for somebody who never heard before that actually no, you don't have to kill yourself to work hard to get to a certain
Yeah.
goal. You can there are other ways. And who said that that hustle culture, right? Who said that's the way?
Yeah.
It's a way.
Yeah. Well, okay, so that's something that I think a lot of us have to go through, right? Because there's this ideal people say work smarter, not harder, right? Why do we have to hustle? Why can't we, move on ahead in life and not like kill ourselves to do it, right? But there is something to be said about like hard work and like setting goals for yourself and trying to achieve them, because sometimes things really are like difficult. Especially when you think you know what you're doing or how things are going to turn out, and then it's like, oh my gosh, this is not it at all. um so how do you, when you're faced with, okay, I'm going to have to put in long hours for this, or I have to do something I really didn't want to do, how do you handle that psychologically if it's not in line with your original vision?
So the Tao talks a lot about flow, right?
Hmm.
It talks about like be like water. The best way to be is to live like water, and water flows. And it talks a lot about surrendering to the Tao. The Tao being the translation is the way, but you could think of it as God or spirit or the universe or higher self or whatever.
Hmm.
I don't think another thing the Tao says, the name which can be named is not actually the name, right? Like the Tao that can be told is not the Tao. So uh,
Hmm.
the meaning being like it doesn't matter what we call it, but there is a flow that's greater than us. That's
Yeah.
the point.
Sure. Sure.
And
Yeah.
and sure, another verse. There's a verse that says, you know, there's a time to be exhausted. There's a time to rest. And I believe the Bible says something similar as well. There's a lot
Yep.
of similarities. Yeah.
All right.
So
Well, that's what Sunday is for, or Saturday.
yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Hmm.
yeah, but like you know, but meaning it's not about. So I think language is important. Obviously, I'm a writer, but like that's not. I just think it's important. So I don't love the phrase of like some like you have to work hard,
Hmm.
because hard for me carries a pretty negative connotation. But
Sure.
I was also pushed very hard early on in life. And straight A student, etc., summa cum laude, so for me, hard, like I don't love the word God. I think there's different words you can use. So we all have different relations to language, right? So for me, I reframe things. If it's something I really want to do, then it's about feeling that passion. And that passion can take you, meaning like I can be writing for many hours straight and not really feel the hardness of it, more like I'm going with the flow of my own passion.
Right. So, but here, okay. So I think when we all find those times where we're in the flow, like
Yeah.
we're going with it, and we're like, oh my
Yeah.
God, this is it. This is great. It doesn't always seem to last forever. It's like
No,
kind of,
of course not.
it's like you get into the stream, this
Yeah.
current, and then it's like
Yeah.
it's gone, and you're off current
Yeah.
again. So is there a way to kind of keep that going
Yes. Yes. I mean,
indefinitely?
yes. I think that, so for me, what's been really important, and it's something I come back to because I forget and I come back to it, but it's this connection to this higher self or my inner voice, my intuition, whatever you can call it, whatever, but it's a connection to not my personality self, not the one who's like, oh, did I say the wrong thing? Or did it not that little, like, I would say lower self, the self that most of us live in most of the time, right? The personality self. I need to constantly be connecting to something greater. And so when I do that, I am able to find that flow way more regularly. So I lose it, but then I find it. And for me, it's that balance of the loss and the rediscovery.
Hmm.
Because we're in physical, we're not going to stay in the flow of consciousness all the time, but it's
Yeah,
to
yeah.
be able to redirect yourself there.
So that's kind of the goal. But if we're starting from a place where, because I've been there with the depression and addiction and
Sure.
other things, like how do you get out of that hole in the first place? Because that's the hardest part, I think.
Absolutely. But it's the same way as you do anything. It's even the same way as you do the grand things, right? The things that everything is one step at a time. So a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. That's from the Tao Te Ching. It's literally shrinking things down to the next moment. And because many of us who have been depressed probably have that tendency, like
Mhm.
I don't think I'll never be depressed again, because there's been moments of, having kids. I suffered with postpartum depression. I had to go on something. I went off of something. I went off of my antidepressants, and it's always challenging. It's always challenging to deal with the things within life that we can't control, right? So,
Mhm.
like, for example, I mean, yes, kids, a lot of us have kids because we want to, but even the hormones and the stuff that happens after, or the how hard it can be, we can't control that. And not to mention the pandemic or wars, or so there's
Yeah,
things that
yeah.
we can't control that will obviously bring us into dark places.
Sure.
And the one minuscule moment at a time really works for me.
One minuscule moment at a time. So obviously, yeah, there's always like so many things happening. Um, do you write things out? Like, is that how you kind of you face each one individually, or are you able to kind of just let things go?
At this point, and I'm gonna say at this point because I do like
Hmm.
to differentiate, because I too have been at the bottom, but at this point,
Hmm.
I'm pretty good at letting things go. I'm pretty good at I know that I'm not my thoughts, and I'm not my mind, and I'm not my suffering, and I'm
Hmm.
not even my identity. So I have a
Okay.
very strong,
Yeah.
feeling of that at all the
Yeah.
time. I feel that I live in both spaces all the time.
How much of that is Buddhist philosophy versus the Tao Te Ching, or is it, or they both share that same idea of self?
So the Tao definitely, talks a lot about the stillness of the mind,
Hmm.
letting go of the mind. But yes, as you mentioned, of course, I looked into the Buddhist teachings as well, and I was a yogi for a long time, and
Oh, cool. Yeah.
you read yogic scriptures, and
Hmm.
they're all quite similar. But at this point, it doesn't come from outside of me, if that makes sense. It comes from within me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how much of that is mental work versus emotional work?
That's a good question. And so I think that we have this tendency as humans to differentiate, like what we talked about, like the paranormal versus the normal. But I don't even
Right.
believe in the normal, because honestly, if you look at science, right? I'm not even
Mhm.
talking about, if you look at science, like, the reality that we do see is such a small part of what is
Oh, for
actually
sure.
there. We don't know the vastness of,
Mhm.
but our brains only perceive so much. So I think that these delineations are, they're funny, and they're really for us to feel safer, because it's scary, right? Like, it's
Mm.
the vastness of what is out there. I think it's scary for a lot of people. Probably not for you and your audience.
Not so much.
No, not for me either.
Especially chat tonight. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely not for me either. And so, like, for me, the spiritual, the mental, the emotional, they all have to go together. I can't really separate them,
Mhm.
because honestly, there's a lot of self-help stuff out there that
Yeah.
it's not that it bugs me, because everyone, there's, I think there's room and there's a need for everything, but you can't really have spirituality completely separate from psychology,
Mhm.
and vice versa. And I think when we tend to, like, like psychology being like, just, this is just how the brain works, this is how the emotions work. I think that
Sure.
we have to look at ourselves as whole beings. And
Yeah.
that's what I um, tend to at least try to do, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, we know that our consciousness, like the mind, there are literally brain waves that go out beyond the neurons, right? Like into the surrounding area. It's measurable. So our consciousness is, plugged into other aspects of reality besides what we think is going on up here. Um, do you do you believe that? Um, are you in line with the whole power of intention, the secret, and that sort of thing?
Yes. I mean, as we all know, the secret's quite simplified.
Hmm.
I mean, everyone knows that, who knows, like,
Well, what's simplified about the secret?
so, but I'm not, by the way, I'm not anti it being simplified, because
Hmm.
even my own work, like, the don't just sit there, do nothing. It's not that I simplified it, but I like to talk in a way. I really think it's, sometimes we live in these echo chambers where we all know the secret. And
Hmm.
so then, but then we only talking to each other. So I think the greatest thing that the secret did is reach out to the masses who maybe have not
Hmm.
ever even considered consciousness. But so what's simplified is consciousness is actually quite complicated, right? So it's
Yeah.
not as simple. So when I think what happened is, if if you get so obsessed, so the secret says, like, your thoughts become things, right? As an example.
Hmm.
So yes, but there's such a complexity to us as beings. So I'm an energy healer as well. I mean, I don't practice anymore, but this is something I study. So I was a Reiki trained healer. I recently did a long course on vortex energy. So I'm very um into that, I guess you would say, into
Vortex energy. Interesting.
vortex energy healing. It's there's so many
Is
different
is
modalities.
Yeah, yeah. Is that a technique, or is that like somewhere?
It's
Okay, because I was thinking, is there somewhere in New York I can go to and like plug into the vortex?
well, nowadays everything's on Zoom, right?
Well, that's true. It
But
could. What if you can zoom into a vortex? Yeah.
yeah, well, so like so vortex energy healing, I met someone who lives not far from me who does that, and I found it really fascinating and cool too. And like I
Mhm.
said, I believe everything at least a little bit, because
Okay.
whatever works. So I would say that the simplification is almost a necessity, because I've been deep into, like, energy and consciousness and
Mhm.
spirituality for several decades now, and I think it's great that there's stuff being put out there. I guess the secret's been over a decade now too, but the stuff is put out there that anyone can pick up who maybe never considered this before and find something useful.
Does it require belief in the supernatural, or is it just a philosophy?
You're talking about
The Tao Te Ching and your approach to that.
well, the Tao Te Ching is just a philosophy,
Mhm.
but for me, when I read it, being that it's so old, you know, it predates re- the religions that we're used to in the Western world. It's old.
Sure.
It's 6th century BC. So and it's so applicable today. So for
Mhm.
me, there's a real supernatural aspect to it
Hmm.
because I'm like, pick it up. Like, I started writing this book before the pandemic, but then the pandemic hit and like every single verse was like, oh my God, we need to hear this. We need to hear this. And so for me, there's a magic in that.
Well, and that tells us a lot about humans. I mean, we haven't changed, from for thousands of years. We're still the same, psychologically at least.
Yeah. But I am very hopeful that we are evolving. Well, at least some of us are definitely evolving, right? And
Well,
then
within our individual life, yeah,
yeah,
but as a species,
as a
that's different.
species for sure. But I think that I'm an optimist. I think that it takes a tipping point. Like it doesn't need to be 100% of humans now understand that we're interconnected and
Right.
now like get oneness and they feel it. I think that when enough of us feel it, understand it, live accordingly,
Mhm.
I think we will see big changes, and I'm hopeful for that. I don't know if it's gonna be my lifetime, but
Right. To
several
over
lifetimes perhaps.
Yeah, to overly simplify that, is that like almost herd mentality, but on a global scale? Like we all just get to the same there's enough people on the same page?
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell wrote the book The Tipping Point, a
Mhm.
while back, and it's this understanding that, because you tend to, if you think about it, like, just mentally, you'll think, "Well, it needs to be a majority." But
Yeah.
they've done studies of people meditating, right? And, like, just
Mhm.
group meditation in a specific place, and they found that I think it was, I might be getting the exact number wrong, but I believe it was 10%, or maybe perhaps even smaller. Anyway, there's a percentage, like they found that there was a percentage point, pretty
Mhm.
small, where or maybe it was 1%. See, that's a big difference. But anyway, when a certain amount
But
of people,
small. Yeah.
yeah, in an area gathered with the intention to increase peace, decrease negativity, they
Mhm.
found studies found that crime decreased tremendously, not just during that meditation, but after, for a while after, crime, accidents, etc. And for whatever reason, I'm not gonna guess, but for whatever reason, we don't. That's not as known as it should be. These studies aren't as continued as they should be. But I believe 100% that it takes, focused energy from a
Mhm.
few is much more powerful than haphazard energy from even masses. I think it just takes enough of us.
Have there been any, influences in your life from individuals that shifted your, your perception of reality or your paradigm of reality as you understood it?
Yeah, and actually my whole life works that way. So uh I've recently been really into, for example, extraterrestrial stuff, but it's pretty new for me. Like I've
Sure,
been
sure.
watching um now I'm blanking on it. I apologize, but the famous movie that like Steven Tyler was talking about,
And the Close Encounters of the
Close Encounters of the Fifth
Third Kind.
Kind, Third Kind.
Oh, I don't know which one he was there's also the Fourth Kind, that's another movie, but the Steven Spielberg movie, that's Close
Oh, no,
Encounters
no,
of
no,
the Third
not the
Kind.
movie. I'm talking about the documentary. I think it's Close Encounters.
Oh.
The
Oh,
f-
CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind or something
yeah,
like that?
yeah,
Is that a Stephen Greer documentary?
yes,
Maybe.
Stephen Greer, and he also had the other one that
Yeah.
was called not unacknowledged.
Unacknowledged.
Unacknowledged,
Mhm.
yeah. So I've been only recently um taking the time. So my book was out. I
Mhm.
did the publicity. I'm writing. I have a second book that I've written and I'm waiting for edits. So basically, I had the time. Let's just say, and I got into it, and now I'm here interviewing with you. So my whole life has worked pretty much that way.
Mhm.
And so for Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, the foreword is written by New York Times bestselling author Laura Day. She's a pretty known intuitive and psychic. Intuitive is what she prefers, but she's a psychic.
Mhm.
And in that field, she's very well known. She was a psychic for lots of celebrities in her earlier days, and she works with Fortune 500 companies. And so I discovered her book called Practical Intuition when I was 14. I just walked into a store, Barnes and Nobles, and that I was always, I guess, I was always drawn to those sections, the spiritual, the
The new
psychological,
age. Yeah.
new age, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I picked up her book, and lo and behold, years later, I met her and I studied with her, and I really, so I'm certified intuitive through her, and she wrote this forward, and it
Mhm.
was everything always does work full circle. I believe it does for everyone. I just think you have to pay attention.
Is that the same thing as being open?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe a easier way to put it is synchronicity.
Mhm.
I think when we're open to synchronicity, synchronicity is right in front of us. Like it's how I live, um, and it's how I've always lived. So maybe I'm
Yeah.
lucky because I knew that from a young age.
Well, what does it feel like when you're in that space?
It's awesome. I feel that I'm in constant communication with consciousness, with a greater consciousness. I have such a strong belief in this energy that's greater than me
Mhm.
that my little stuff, and I say little like this because it's not little when you feel like crap, and it's not little when you're beating yourself up, but because I know that, because I have that connection pretty established at this point, I'm able to see the littleness of my struggle.
Yeah. You have children, and some people don't have children
Right.
and decide not to have children. Do you feel like children are necessary for people to have a meaning in life?
No,
Where do you
no.
no? Okay.
I don't like any, and that would be, by the way, very non-Taoist,
Ah.
because the Tao Te Ching is one thing it's constantly saying in one way or another through the verses is
Mhm.
that there's no one way. There's your way and there's my way, and so
Mhm.
your goal is to. It's always saying like stop trying to please everybody else. If you constantly looking to others, then you lose your way. So it tells us that all the time. And I think to think that you must have children is just looking outside yourself. You must figure out what you need.
Is it fair to say that if you wanna make a change in your life, that you also have to change your emotional state?
So, it's interesting. So I got an award recently for Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing. And it was like in
Hey,
the,
congratulations.
thank you. It was a books for better living, I
Okay,
believe. Anyway, so the
cool.
award was for like motivation slash improvement.
Mhm.
And obviously, everyone wants to know who doesn't want a medal, but the improvement part bothered me a little bit, if I'm honest, the self improvement thing, because I actually think that we none of us need to improve ourselves.
Okay.
We need to see the divinity, the perfection, or not perfection. Maybe that's not the right word. The divinity and the magic of being that is already there. And so what the Tao does very well, there's a book by Wayne Dyer about the Tao Te Ching many years ago, and it was called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so the whole idea, and what I always stick to, is if you can shift your perception, you can better any situation. And that's why my book is called Don't Just Sit There, Do Nothing, because honestly, perception can be shifted from any space, from even from the bottom.
Then what is the do nothing part? Because I totally get it, like meditation, sitting still, blah, 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 but I for you, it means something much more than that, right?
Yeah, I mean, and also, as we all know, there's no nothing, right? Because we're moving. I mean, we're moving particles. We're constantly in motion.
Mm,
We're
true.
constantly
Yeah.
we're not ever really still.
Yeah, like, you're always making a choice, action or inaction.
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
totally.
yeah.
But so the do nothing is about this understanding that it takes a shift in here, and yes, and emotionally, but it's an internal shift that makes things better for you. So a lot of us wait, and I remember this long, long period in my life where I was waiting. A lot of us
Mhm.
wait for things to get better. We wait for something
Yeah.
outside of ourselves, whether it's the right doctor, or it's the right someone to discover us, I was an actress, or it's or it's the right relationship, right? The
Hmm.
right, the right partner will come along, and then everything will be better. And I lived like that for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think most of us have periods. And the light bulb moment is that understanding that actually you don't need to do anything. It's not about doing, it's what you're being, it's how you're being. And that's an internal shift.
It's how you're being.
Yeah,
Uh, can you expand on that a little bit?
sure. And that's back to the secret. Your energy creates your
Mhm.
life. Your internal state creates your life. So it's really hard, I think, for people to accept when you've been down for a long time. And the reason I say all those things, like I was depressed, I was bulimic for 10 years, I was raped, and I was this and that and all the other. I think it's important to say, so that nobody thinks I don't know what it is to be in darkness.
Mhm.
But all of that being said, when you're in a really negative loop internally,
Mhm.
it is really, really hard to shift your life, to make things better, to see better externally. And so that small shift, and again, it could be minuscule to start. That small shift of looking for the light versus allowing yourself to just drown in the darkness, that small
Yeah. Yeah.
shift, that small perspective, shift in perspective is a change in what you're being. So if you're being victimhood, then your life will reflect the life of a victim. And I say that as someone who's been a victim several times in several different ways. And um, but you can't continue to be a victim. So it's what you're being that's important. And when you allow yourself to be the God that is you, the divinity that is you, when you allow yourself to be the light that is you, even if it's just a small step towards it, right? So you can't like just go from real darkness to bright light immediately. But if you start feeling for the light within yourself, for the beauty and the joy that exists there within all of us, when you start going for that, when you start being that, the externals start to shift as well.
Okay, the external center shift. Is there um okay, so let's get a little supernatural for a moment.
Yeah.
So if you have two people
Yeah.
that have intentions, but those intentions are in conflict with each other,
Uh-huh.
um, but you both want your own desire to come true,
Uh-huh.
is there like an issue with that? Does that mean, does it cancel it out? Does one win over the other?
Are you talking about like a relationship?
Yeah, whether it's a relationship or a job, like, two people who are doing the work, putting their intention out there, being positive, one of
Yeah.
them has to get the job, right?
Oh, you're
So,
saying wanting the same job. Okay, so I'm going to say one thing that is a lovely teaching from my mentor, Laura Day, the one who did the forward, who I told you about before. She always says the focused energy of a single person is way more powerful than the haphazard energy of multitudes, right? So we say you say intention, and I think people have this view of intention that I think very few of us walk around with a really truly focused energy.
mhm,
We want things, but wanting and intention are different.
yeah.
And I always, when I intend, and I this is not, I didn't come up with this. I always think this or something better, because it's really, again, that hubris thing to think I really want that job and I must have that job. That's
Mhm.
the small self talking,
Okay,
right? Like,
sure.
so I always leave room for something better. And I would never think then that if you didn't get that job, like, so for me, intention is more about it's not about the specifics of what's inside the picture frame.
Mhm.
It's it's about what the ultimate feeling of all of that is, right? You want to be successful as ABC, but then it's never reliant on just one job, right? There's like there's a multitude of possibilities. And I don't want to be in the way of greater energy by focusing on just one single thing. you do your best, but you also, I think it's important to know that you may not know that what didn't work out ultimately is working out for you.
But is that like faith? Is
Sure.
that
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
but the,
That's
and
a good way of putting it.
but that brings up like the challenge of intent of not intention of destiny or
Mhm.
not having free will. Is it like how do you if you're just letting like whatever the background program is running, right?
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
just trust it and it's gonna
Yeah.
take you somewhere. Is that do you lose free will in that instance?
I don't. But, I see no, I understand what you're saying, and
Yeah.
so for me and this is what the Tao talks a lot about as well, and again,
Mhm.
it's, like, mind-blowing that this is from 6th century BC, so obviously, unless he was really ahead, they were really ahead, whoever wrote this, there's different theories on that.
Mhm.
Um, I think we've been dealing with this forever, but, there's a balance between doing and being and allowing. And this even the secret talks about it. There's a balance between going after what you want and allowing. And so the
Okay.
allowing is faith, the allowing is surrender. And
Mhm.
you do your part, but you also have to surrender. And so you can't hammer things into being. That I learned for myself. I mean, you can. That's not to say you can't. You can, but I
Mhm.
think there's more graceful ways to exist in the world for yourself.
Yeah. Well, then what's the difference between hammering something into being and working hard for something?
So I think working passionately, but again, that's as hard as that
But
word.
but that's a different word. Yeah.
Of
Okay.
course.
So, all right,
Um,
let's just change it to passionately.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, no, but it's okay.
yeah.
Like, you know what? Hard may not carry the meaning for you that it does for me. Because again, like semantics, whatever.
Well, it's okay. No, but we can qualify it. We can say like putting in,
Yeah,
tons of hours or, maybe it's physical labor or whatever. It's something that's just like takes up a lot of time, it's put strain on your life or on you, but you're telling yourself I'm working towards something. What's the difference between that and trying to hammer something into
well,
existence?
even the original one, the first, scenario that you
Mhm.
gave, I think it's uber important to check in with yourself constantly to make sure you're still doing what you actually truly want to be doing. Because a lot of times we start doing things and then we
Mhm.
think, well, this is what I'm committed to doing. And I do think that that's part of that hustle culture mentality that
Yeah.
quitting's bad. I tend to think it's not. I think it's important to know why you're staying or leaving,
Mhm.
in a pursuit, let's say. So
Yeah.
I think that that's where the do nothing is so important because the constant reconnection with yourself, with that inner voice, which to me is one and the same with consciousness. Like the inner voice is what's connected to the bigger picture. It's
Mhm.
important to check in and to make sure you're still on track. And if you're like still passionate about it, and you're like, I know that I'm onto something and I'm gonna keep on it because it feels right. If it feels right, that's to me different than hammering things into place. A lot of times the
Mm.
hammering is when we refuse to take the signs, refuse to listen to ourselves, and just feel like we need to keep pushing the boulder up the cliff. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes it's okay to let go.
Yes, but sometimes you're working towards something, right? And you feel like it's the right thing, but it just doesn't quite work out. What does the Tao Te Ching say about that? Like how or what do you say about that? How
Well,
do
the
you
Tao
go?
Te
Yeah.
Sure. Well, the Tao Te Ching being Buddhist-like, because I
Mhm.
I wrote a whole chapter about it because it's hard. So it's hard to accept these philosophies like the Tao Te Ching, like Buddhism, that say like desire
Mhm.
is kind of the source of pain, that
Mm.
non-desire, but that's what they say,
Yeah,
right? So,
sure. Mhm.
right, they say like non-desire is kind of the way to go, right? But I'm not a person that easily accepts that either. So, I have a chapter that's called To Want or Not to Want.
Mhm.
And I believe that wanting is the human experience. That, the working towards stuff is just how we're built. We can't actually just sit there and be like, well, I don't care either way. That's not our juice, right? Like our energy comes from these dreams and these desires. And I think the important thing, though, is to really appreciate the journey, the movement.
Mm.
Um,
And not get hung up on some particular goal. Is that what you're saying? Or
not get hung up on a particular when. That's really important. That's been really
okay.
important for me.
Yep.
And not even on the how, right? Like, how is this gonna? You do your part. You do what you're called to do, even when it's hard. If you're doing it passionately, like you do what feels like the next right step for you. But you can't. You can, but I think it's not effective to spend so much energy obsessing about the when and the how of the end result. That's
Mhm.
where that surrender and allowing comes in.
From chat, Charles Smar asks, how much of this is just getting out of your own way?
Charles, that's a really great way of putting it, because that's literally what the Tao Te Ching says. That it says, it has this great phrase of the way, which is, the Tao, the way is easy, but people prefer the side paths. And it's interesting to me that we spend so much of our time bucking the current, being in the way.
Mhm.
Um, look, and again, I say this with full compassion, because I too am human, struggling the same way as everyone else. But I think that it's important to know that sometimes our ego is in our way,
Yeah, how do you define the ego?
like the lower self, like the ego that wants it yesterday, the ego that believes I should have the great success, and
Right.
not in 10 years from now, but yesterday. And
Like the reptilian brain.
right, like the part of ourselves that does not really care about the oneness and the connectedness. And people ruled by ego often walk over others to get to where they want to go. That's what I mean also
Yeah.
by hammering things into place. It's like losing that interconnectedness that makes us higher, more evolved, the part of ourselves that has us being quote unquote good people. And again, I'm not like qualifying what that means, different things for different people, but
Sure.
the hammering into place, we leave that all behind just to get that boulder up.
We have some earlier comments,
For
and
sure.
I wanted to bring these up. Maria Wilson Duff says, I'm 53. At this point, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
Well,
Eh,
Maria, I'm 41 and same. And I don't, I think the not knowing is it's a beautiful thing to allow yourself to be, because also we shift. So maybe there isn't any one thing you need to be when you grow up.
Yeah. And Justin says the same. I'm 43 and I have no clue.
But I think that people who know they don't have a clue, I'm one of those
Mhm.
people. I always say, like, be a seeker, not a knower.
Uh-huh.
That's
Okay.
like that's another Eastern philosophy of beginner's mind.
Okay, so that just means you're always learning, but
You're
you do
always
learn. I mean,
open.
there is wisdom in with experience and age, like, right?
Of course, but it's
Yeah.
it's an you know what it is? It's an understanding that there's still so much you don't know.
Yeah.
You know how people get to some people get to a certain age and they're like, I know everything. This is the way it has to be. This is
Yeah.
older generations, maybe
Yeah.
when you
Yeah, they're
shift,
just like, I'm done, I'm stuck. I've got to figure it out.
and I know
Yeah.
best.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think that it's so beneficial for humanity to move away from that and to leave an openness. It doesn't mean you don't. I mean, I know way more now than I did then, but I thought I knew more then. That's the funny thing.
That's you know what? Okay, I think both things are true. When I was younger, I thought I knew a heck of a lot. I mean, but I was still a seeker at the time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I thought I knew more than I did. But I also assumed by the time I was in my 40s that I would also know a lot more than I actually do now.
Yeah.
you know, but now the paradox is that now at this age, having experienced life, I'm actually like, wow, I'm so glad I know as much as I do now, which my younger self would probably be let down with. But it's a matter of perspective, because it's like what you assume your future, what life actually is when you're younger, isn't really always the case. It's a journey. It's a journey of discovery, like you're saying.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's a beautiful thing it's a privilege to keep getting older and growing and learning that. I mean, like would have been great to know everything we've learned then, but that wasn't meant to be that way.
Right. Okay, we only have a few minutes left. Is there anything in your research and in the book that you really think is important that you'd like to emphasize?
Yes, I really, um, like I said, am into the energy part of everything.
Hmm.
Charles says 68 and still seeking. Awesome. And I also hope to always be seeking. I mean, I know I will be because life is short. You can't get all the answers in one lifetime. But I think it's important to remember that energy part of you, that the energy that you carry with you into all situations, into all conversations,
Hmm.
into those interviews, whatever it is that you're wanting in life, that energy is so potent and at least as important as what we say and what we do. And let's also, get honest with ourselves. So I had a check-in with myself, and I know that some of the things I was trying to push up a boulder, push that boulder, push up the hill,
Hmm.
I have split energy on. There's things I want, and there's parts of me that don't want it or fear it. I think that's the do nothing part. It's really important to check in
Uh-huh.
and to know where your energy is.
And there's also the one of the most difficult things is like the sacrifice part, because sometimes when you want something, or the flow is telling you go this way,
Yeah.
but in order to do that, like, you have to not just let something go, but I mean, like, maybe you have a job or something that's holding you back, but that's the thing that's keeping you alive, putting bread on the table. It's it's a very scary thing, I think, for a lot of people, because they look and they go, that's what I want to do, but if I do that, I might lose my house, or I might lose whatever. How do you navigate that mindscape?
I say that, like, the getting honest with where your energy, just to know, why it's important to get honest, to know that you're like in two places at once, perhaps, that yes, you want that, but you fear that or whatever. It's
Hmm.
important because you realize you actually do bring into your life everything that you focus on, but a lot of times the reason we're stagnant is our energy is very split. So you start negotiating with yourself. You start talking yourself out of that fear. Or, like, for
Hmm.
me, I'm a really invested mom and my kids are relatively young, and there's things that I really want to do, but I also don't want to miss out on my kids. And so I have to get honest. That's my big block to certain success that I may want. Or so I get honest with myself and I negotiate. You negotiate the different parts of yourself. You say, this is true, but perhaps if I do it slowly, so that maybe you don't lose your job or you don't miss it, maybe if it's a little at a time, and perhaps I could let go of the timing aspect of it and do a little bit here and a little bit there. And so it's important to don't just sit there, do nothing, and to have those conversations with yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember hearing Oprah once say something like, if she doesn't know what to do, don't do anything. Like, if she's faced with like a challenge or a choice, she's like, just stop.
And you know what else she said that's funny? Oprah, one of her big quotes that keep is, you can have everything, just not at the same time.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, that's a challenge. We have so many things that excite us, that
Yeah.
that we're enthused about or desire, however want to formulate that. But yeah, trying to do one at a time is sometimes the most difficult thing.
Yeah, and it's also okay, it's okay. Like, we're lucky to have all of these passions and to have these pulls, but also wherever you are, that's another thing that you asked if there's anything I want to say. The big thing that I realize is, like, wherever you are, however
Mhm.
confused or lost or okay, wherever you are, it's okay. Like, that's where you get to be right now, and it's a gift because everything has its lessons for you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to say before we part, since you're jumping into the paranormal world a little bit, or the extraterrestrial world, just take things in bite sizes, because there are a lot of crazy ideas out there. And I'm like you, on this platform, we keep a very open mind, but I'm very careful to not subscribe to like anything wholeheartedly, because I've just seen a lot of people go down rabbit holes.
Uh-huh.
Um, it's a crazy world. I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. It thrills me. But it's just there's a lot of I don't want to say necessarily charlatans. There are that too, but I think there are a lot of people that just believe wholeheartedly
Yeah.
what they know is the absolute fact and the truth. And I just can't always. I think there's so many unknowns in the extraterrestrial and paranormal phenomena that I can't subscribe to anything in particular.
I've in a similar, I think, in the world that I've been in like I said, like I did the vortex healing. There's a very strong belief system that comes with that. I'm also at this point, not earlier in my life, but very careful not to just throw myself into any one belief system. So I've realized it's a truth, that's a truth for someone.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's many truths. I think there's many potentialities, and maybe they exist simultaneously. Who knows? But I'm with you on that, and thank you for telling me that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being here with me. We'll leave it at that. The many potentialities.
Yeah.
I'm really excited. I'm glad we got to chat tonight. And if you do ever have another work, please let me know. I'd love to chat with you again, Jessie. It was really fun.
Again, I have your email. I'll just contact you directly because all those middlemen.
Yeah, that'd be much easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
If everyone listening, if you want to find out about Jessie and her book, go to Jessie Jessie Kanzer KANZER.com, and you can also go to Amazon and you can get her book. Don't just sit there, do nothing. All right, thanks, Jessie. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you for everyone in chat. I appreciate your feedback. I want to thank Race Hobbs from the UnX Network. Race and I go way back, and that network is growing. So if you like this show, if you like paranormal shows, ufological shows, spirituality shows, check out all the other programs on the UnX Network, unxnetwork.com. As usual, everyone, thanks again. Peace and love, and until next time, live in the mystery.